and welcome to another installment in my series of videos on the Soil and Ocean channel, offering specific ideas for classroom activities using my picture book, Moth and Wasp, Soil and Ocean, Remembering Chinese Scientist Zhelong's Work for Sustainable Farming. In this video, I show some of the opportunities for exploring the Chinese writing system while reading Moth and Wasp with your class. As teachers, we love opening our students' minds to new ways of thinking about the world. Spending even half an hour learning about the Chinese writing system can do just that. Having recently mastered the skill of decoding strings of letters and understanding them as words, kids in English language environments may be amazed and delighted to discover there are other ways that humans have figured out to communicate through writing. Now, a common misunderstanding about Chinese is that the written characters are all pictograms. That is, that they all evolved from drawings of the things that they represent. Actually, a pretty small percentage of all Chinese characters originated in true pictograms, but one example of one that did is the word for bug. Scholars have found pieces of bone from way back in the Shang Dynasty, more than 3,000 years ago, where people engraved this symbol on the left to mean poisonous snake. After being engraved with different symbols, the bones were then heated, and depending on how they cracked, they could be used to make predictions about the future, and that's why they're called oracle bones. Now, centuries later, people made bronze vessels and engraved a similar symbol, also meaning poisonous snake. But in later centuries, the symbol evolved, and it became what we now use to mean bug, insect, or worm, and we pronounce this character chong. Now, the character chong also serves as one of 214 of what we call radicals. That's the piece of a Chinese character that suggests the meaning. So you can see that there are a great many Chinese characters that contain the character chong as one component, usually, but not always, on the left side. So this gives us the hint that the character in question has something to do with bugs. So usually the names of specific insects contain that chong radical. So if you look at the left side of the characters that mean mosquito, cicada, or ant, you can see that chong radical. But note that these characters weren't created by biologists, so the category chong does not map exactly onto a modern scientific understanding of insect. And that's why I sometimes like to use that colloquial word bug instead, because all kinds of creepy crawly animals like spiders and shrimp and even frogs also have that chong radical. And some words that aren't animals but are still somehow related to bugness also have that component, like honey, since it's made by bees, and the verb to slither, since that's how snakes move, and snakes are a creepy crawly kind of animal. So some of these characters are also, I should point out, written in a more traditional form in Taiwan and Hong Kong, so I've noted that here in case people are learning those characters in class. And also for kids who are learning Chinese, just a note they may be more familiar with compound words like wenzi for mosquito, or mai for ant, or zhizhu for spider, or qinghua for frog. But the individual characters, wa or zhu or yi, also contain those meanings. Now, having explored the way the chong character and its associated radical works, your students can go on a bug hunt in the pages of Moth and Wasp. Of course, there are plenty of actual pictures of different kinds of insects, but the amazing illustrator Melanie Chan has also incorporated Chinese characters into art in the borders of the book, and some of these have to do with insects or bugs. So this kind of art is called paper cutting, and I talk more about that in the intro video, but right now I'll talk about the characters. On this page we see the chong character itself accompanying an illustration of a leaf roller moth laying eggs on a rice plant and the larvae as it grows inside the rolled up stalk. Then later in the book, students will be able to find other examples of characters with the chong radical. So this one is moth, pronounced buh, and this one is wasp, pronounced feng, and you can see the left side of those characters contain that chong radical. Now, we talked about how the radical portion of the character works to suggest the general meaning of the character, but what about the rest of the character? Now, there's no hard and fast rule about this, but very, very often the rest of the character gives a strong clue as to its pronunciation, and this is true for both the characters moth and wasp. And we can see that by looking at other characters that include the same right side contained in the character, for example, for moth. So if you look at the very commonly used character for I or me, it looks the same as the right portion of the character for moth, and it's pronounced not exactly the same, but a little bit similar, wo, and moth is pronounced Now, the character for lofty, that has a mountain radical, because mountains are lofty, is pronounced exactly the same as moth. So it is also and that's the same for the abbreviation for Russia. It has the person radical instead of the bug or the mountain radical, and that one's pronounced And the word for hungry, which has the food or grain radical on the left, is pronounced just a little bit differently. Instead of it's but you can get a strong clue of that pronunciation because it has that right hand portion. And then the same is true for the right hand portion of the character for wasp, feng. Many other characters that contain that same right hand portion are also pronounced feng or something similar. So feng is so, it has a silk radical. Feng is mountainous with a mountain radical, of course. Feng is also beacon fire with a fire radical instead of a bug or a mountain or a silk radical. And it can be the point of a spear if it is using a metal radical, also pronounced feng. Give you one more example that we'll be able to trace in the art of Moth and Wasp, and that's the character for shui, which also began as a pictogram back in the Shang Dynasty. In its current form, it looks like this character in the middle. When it's in its radical form, it usually takes a slightly different shape, which in Chinese we call sandian shui, which is 3 drops of water. So it looks like 3 little drops of water, and typically on the left-hand side. And so we see a very prominent character in the Moth and Wasp picture book is this character yang, which has the basic meaning of ocean, but also connotes vast and foreign. And I talk about the symbolism of this word and how it's used in the phrase uniting soil and ocean. I talk about that especially in the Solidarity Science video that's also on this channel. Here I'll just focus on the character itself. So we can see the 3 drops of water on the left side, which makes sense because oceans have to do with water. In modern Chinese, to avoid confusion with all the other words that are also pronounced yang, we usually combine it with another word that means ocean. That's hai, which also has the 3 drops of water, and we say it as a compound, hai yang. Now the water radical appears in a great many characters, even more than the bug or chong radical. These characters typically have something to do with water, though sometimes the connection is somewhat indirect. And here I've shared 3 examples: qing, which is clear, shen, which is deep, and shi, which is wash. And so all of these have those 3 drops of water on the left side. And as with the characters for Moth and Wasp, the character yang for ocean also has a component that gives a very strong hint as to its pronunciation, because there are quite a few other characters that have that same right-hand component and are pronounced the same or similarly. So on its own, that component is itself actually a radical that means sheep and is pronounced exactly the same as yang, ocean. It's yang, sheep or goat. If it has the air or gas radical, it's yang and it means oxygen. With the illness radical, it's also yang and it means itch. So you can see, you learn quite a bit about these characters in a very short time, and I hope you can share this with your students and that it can open their minds to new ways of thinking about how humans express ourselves. So thank you so much for watching. For more, please check out the book companion website, mothandwasp.com. If you'd like to buy a copy of the book or multiple copies for your classroom, you can find it in hardcover or paperback, wherever you like to buy your books. And please consider subscribing to the channel Soil and Ocean so that you can be notified when any new videos are posted. Thank you so much and have a great day.